Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to teach you how to take some hardware store items and some items you may have laying around the house and turn them into a lightweight, portable, and very efficient camping stove. Hey folks, let's first talk about why this concept works. Why do I use alcohol as a fuel? Well, you can find it in a variety of forms. Whether you're using something like this, which is a gas line additive, basically just alcohol to keep your gas from freezing, or you're using first aid grade alcohol, something you would use as an alcohol swab to clean a wound, or you use something like Everclear, it's all gonna work. So, the reason I use alcohol is because it can be found in a number of forms. It can be found in a number of forms very cheaply. It's actually about the same cost or slightly more than propane, but it's a lot easier to transport. Propane comes in a pressurized canister, so whether it's empty or full, you're almost carrying the exact same weight. Something like this, you're actually burning weight as you use it. It doesn't have to be kept in a gas form, doesn't have to be kept at any specific temperature, it's just really easy to transport. So it's fairly cheap, it's easy to transport, it's easy to find, and it burns clean. This burns most of the alcohol off as your fuel. It releases very little smog or just dirt or soot or anything else. So it's a very clean burning fuel. So it's a great fuel source for a camping stove. It also will work at pretty much any altitude. There's a lot of reason why people use something like white gas opposed to propane when you're going up to a high altitude, because a pressurized tank won't work quite as well. Something that's a liquid fuel that you're just relying on evaporation, it's going to work well in a variety of altitudes. Let's get started with some of the things that you're going to need. Obviously, your fuel. This is the one I recommend, just how well it works for the price you pay. This is one of the most efficient ones there is, but of course there's a number of options. So you need your alcohol fuel source. You need 2 just regular aluminum cans, just beer cans, pop cans, whatever, it's all going to work. You're going to need something for the inside that's not going to burn. This is actually a Bondo material that you would buy at an auto parts store. It's basically a fiberglass mesh. So if you were working on popping out dents and bondoing the side of a car, this is what you would use. You can also use fiberglass insulation just from your attic. Now, if you have a home with an attic, go pull out just a little pinch of that. You're not going to need much. It doesn't make sense to go to the hardware store and buy like a whole bunch of that. You need less than a handful. So this Bondo stuff, all that, and you can actually get this done without the wicking material. I just find it to be a little bit safer because that prevents it from sloshing around or spilling, and it just kind of helps provide a medium for the alcohol to be absorbed in. And then you're basically just going to need household cutting tools, and I use a small screwdriver as a punch. You can also use just a small nail as well. The other thing you will need is some sort of heat reflective tape. You can use something that you would use to work on hot pipes or an air duct. This is actually tape that I bought in an auto parts store that you would use to seal a leak in your exhaust line. So if you have a leak in your muffler or one of your exhaust pipes, this is what you would use. I wouldn't recommend regular duct tape because it's rubberized. It's gonna melt when it gets in a high temperature, and it's going to get a bit gooey and sticky. So you need a metallic tape. So that's pretty much the essentials of what you'll need. And then you'll also need just a finishing nail just to help you punch the holes. So that's it, let's get started. So to do this you need 2 cans. You're actually not even going to use the top of either can. You're going to be using the bottom of both. That's why you need 2. Otherwise you could just get away with 1, but this isn't going to work. You need the bottom. So make sure both cans are completely intact, not dented, dinged up, anything like that. So take 1 can and flip it over. You'll take just a regular magic marker, Sharpie, anything like that, and you're going to start marking where you punch holes. So your first hole is going to be right smack dab in the middle. You'll use that to line things up. Then you'll just go to one side, and then you're going to mirror this. So after I mark that one hole, I'll go directly across. Now I'm going to divide that in 2. So I'll put a mark here, and I'll go directly across. And then you just divide that in 2 again. So I put a mark here, and I go directly across. I'll put a mark here and go directly across. This will leave you 8 jet holes around the outside and a vent hole in the middle. I found 8 works pretty darn well. I made another one with 6. What I like about 8 holes just in this spacing is it provides enough holes for the jets to be all the way around the circle, so it burns pretty evenly, but they're close enough together so that if one kind of goes out for a second, it'll likely relight on the other jet. With only 6, when one went out, I would have to relight it on my own. And with more holes, the flame seemed to not reach as high. It seemed to just kind of be divided up amongst more holes. So after you mark your holes, you're going to take a small nail. This is just a 1-penny finishing nail. And you'll actually use that. You'll put it on your hole, hold it in place. And obviously you can use a hammer. I'm just using a armorer's wrench because I have it sitting here. You can use anything. Small hammer is probably better actually. And you're just gonna pop a little hole right there. And you're gonna go and do this in each location. Just follow your marks all the way around the can. And if you miss your hole slightly, no big deal. Don't get upset about it. What you want to avoid doing is denting the can. So this is why I'm using this tiny little nail instead of a big punch. The first time I tried doing this, I tried just using a punch. I tried using an ice pick. The ice pick kind of worked. The punch didn't work well because it applied enough force that it dented the can, which is something you don't want. Because if you start crushing the can, it's just, things aren't going to line up well. So I've punched my holes all the way around. When you get to the middle hole, you can punch it with the same nail, but you can actually use something. This is just actually a small Torx bit. You can use an ice pick, you can use anything. The middle hole can be a little bit bigger because this hole is actually what you're going to use to fill the stove with the alcohol fuel, and then it's going to be covered up. So you can make your middle hole a little bit bigger. You can even make multiple holes if you want, just to help fill it up. Make them close together though. So in this one I just made 2. It doesn't really matter how many you make. This just helps you fill it up. And one reason you need this is as you're filling it up in the middle, your air is venting out the sides. So that helps you fill it quickly. Obviously more holes will help you fill it more quickly, but you don't want this to just collapse and fall apart. So 2, 3, that's probably all you need. After you've poked your holes, it's time to cut your cans. Obviously I've got my holes right here on this end of the can, and so I'm not going to be needing this whole half. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it about, I need about 1/3 of the can, or a little less than 1/3 of the can. So I'm going to start it with a hacksaw. You can start it with anything. You can start it with just punching another hole and then using scissors to cut around it. I just like the saw because it makes it nice and straight and even. And obviously you don't want to push real hard. This can's not super strong. It's a very thin-walled aluminum can. So as soon as I've got the hole started, I'm just going to take, these are just regular kitchen shears, and I'm going to get that in there and I'm going to start cutting around. So that's a pretty dangerous rough edge, so I'm going to want to clean that up a little bit. Yeah, you can file it, but it's easier since you already have the scissors out to just cut another line with your scissors and get a nice clean edge. So at this point, I probably have a little over a quarter of the can, and that's all you need. Obviously, you want to rinse your cans beforehand so it's nice and clean on the inside, so you're not dealing with remains of beer mess on the inside or sticky pop mess on the inside. So you'll take your other can that you didn't mess with, see this one's still intact, and you're going to do the exact same thing. Now I essentially have the two halves of my stove. This one without the holes will be the bottom, this one with the holes will be the top. Now it's time to take your fiberglass mesh or fiberglass filling, just whatever you're using. I recommend fiberglass just because it will not burn. You're going to take that material and you're just going to cut a strip. You can probably cut about a 2 to 3 inch strip, maybe about 15 inches in length. So you can see how I'm kind of getting it started here. And then I'm just going to cut a stripe through this fabric. And you'll end up rolling that and putting that in the inside. Alright, so now that you've cut your fiberglass filling, again, this is probably about 20 inches long, about 2 inches wide. You'll notice the cut's not very even, it's pretty rough because it doesn't matter. So what you're going to want to do is just take this, wrap it around your fingers. Like that, so you're kind of making a very loose roll or coil out of it, and then put this in the bottom of your can, so you can see it like that, and then you're just going to kind of fold it in on itself to stuff it down and kind of smush it against the outer edges of the can. Again, this whole step using the fiberglass fill is not necessary. There are people who have these similar type of stoves that don't use any filler at all. I highly recommend it just because, again, it absorbs some of the alcohol, so if your stove falls over, you're not going to have flaming alcohol squirting out of your can. It's going to slow down the drip a little bit, and it also kind of works as a wick, bringing the alcohol upward in the can. So you're going to burn all of your alcohol, and it's going to help you bring it up instead of having a little bit remaining in the bottom. So with that, you want to take your scissors, see if I can find them here, and you'll just cut a few little V notches in the bottom. They don't need to be big, but just by cutting these little V's, can you see that? Cutting these little V's will help you bend the can into shape just to get this one inside of the other half of the can. Probably only need to do about 3 or so, and they only need to be about, I don't know, maybe a centimeter at most, probably half of that size you can get away with. So those again just help the can have some points to flex around so that you don't crush it. So with that, you're going to take your top half of your can that you punch the holes in, and you're going to squeeze it over the bottom half. And if you have some fibers hanging out, don't worry about it. We'll clean those up in a minute. So sometimes this part can be a little bit tricky. And obviously be careful when you're doing all of this. This aluminum has sharp edges. Don't cut yourself. Be careful, and don't blame me if you're not being careful and you cut yourself. So it's kind of got to pinch it to fit a little bit. Almost there. Alright, so once you kind of get it to fit, it'll hold pretty well on its own. Go ahead and squeeze it so it's flush on the bottom. See that? Right now I'm just going to go ahead and pull these little hairs out because they're doing no good hanging out there, and it kind of bugs me a little bit. And if you need to adjust it a little bit to make sure it sits level, go ahead and take a look at it, spin it around. This one's pretty close. So now you're going to take your heat resistant tape, and if you notice, mine's a little bit longer than the can is tall, which is actually about right. That's about where you want it. So I'm going to go ahead and cut just a thin strip off of this heat resistant tape so it's a little bit better fit. I'm probably cutting about 3/8 of an inch off of this tape. Again, doesn't have to be exact. This is just to seal it. That's about all I'm going to need. So I'll go ahead and finish that up and cut it off. And actually, this little stripe that you just removed, save that because it'll help you later. So you'll peel the tape here. If you have fingernails, that might be a little easier than if you don't. But you'll peel the tape and you will wrap it around your stove. Obviously, you don't want to cover these bottom holes, and you want to go all the way down to the bottom of the lip. And I crinkled it a little bit. That's not going to mess it up. It just looks a little better if you don't crinkle it. So what this tape does is it holds the two cans together, but it also adds a little bit of strength to the side walls of your stove. And then on the bottom, you'll just bend over the excess. And then that little bit of tape that we removed earlier, you'll use that again to cover that seam, just so you have no openings. So it's a completely airtight closure. All right, so you'll peel your tape, just like you did before, and start using it to cover that seam. Obviously, you're going to crinkle it at this point because you're putting a flat piece on something that's not flat. So it really doesn't matter if it's a bit crinkly. And that's the nice thing about the metallic tape, is it bends and adheres to itself pretty darn well. There you go, and just smooth that out a little bit, just so you don't have any huge lumps in it. But that's how you create the body of the stove.